Welcome, Dr. Keltner. It's great to see you, and I'm glad you could join us at the Seekers Forum.
It's great to be with you, Mark.
Thank you. I want to start by asking you about awe as a naturally arising phenomenon.
Yeah.
Now, Ralph Waldo Emerson said, I hold that ecstasy will be found normal, an example of a higher plane of the same gentle gravitation by which stones fall and rivers run. Can you
That's why
can
I'm
you
talking with you, Mark, because you would lead with that quote.
can you tell me something about how awe arises as a naturally occurring phenomenon, and particularly how it promotes survival?
Yeah. So I approach the emotions, including self-transcendent emotions that feel spiritual and mystical and aesthetic from an evolutionary perspective that traces these emotions' histories back in evolutionary time to social mammals, thinks about them in terms of, as you suggest, their evolutionary benefits. And so how does awe arise in terms of with the natural patterns that river may flow or a stone may fall? It around the world, when people encounter vast mysteries that Emerson encountered a lot of in his life that they don't understand, that elicits this cascade of responses that we call awe, the natural unfolding of the emotion. We have patterns of brain activation, like the reduction of default mode network activity. We have goosebumps, this mammalian response of binding with others to face peril. We have activation of the vagus nerve. We have tears, a parasympathetic response. And then the conceptual processes start to occur of feeling small and connected to large, often spiritual forces. So that is the deep evolutionary structure of awe. And our research in 25, 30 countries, like Emerson suggests, he used the word bliss, a close relative of awe. These are emotions that, as Jane Goodall said, are really part of our mammalian DNA. And they benefit us because they connect us to collectives. They help us cooperate and collaborate and sense our collective identity. And there's an increasing consensus now that we survive by cooperation and being part of a collective. And awe's the big booster of that tendency.
Mm-hmm. And what happens when we are awe deprived?
Oh my God. I think our world is, in many ways, we have a lot of awe, but we're also awe deprived. Our nature is being harmed by capitalism and the like. We're spending too much time on small screens. When we're awe deprived, we're vulnerable to depression and anxiety.
Mm.
We have too deep a focus on the self, where our body may get inflamed. We start to feel isolated and disconnected. We may show a stress profile. We lose our imagination. We have a bunch of studies showing with kids and adults and people who are poor and well-to-do and the like, that awe just catalyzes our imagination. And so it's I think a lot of the difficulties that kids face today, part of it's pandemic related, but part of it is this sense in our culture that we don't wander, we don't embrace mystery, we're always test driven, we're always result driven, we don't embrace complexity, all the sources of awe. And it's in part why I think our young people are more stressed than ever and vulnerable to depression and other things.
So while there are all of these increases in technology and innovation, our capacity for awe is actually diminished.
Well, Mark, I think it's in many ways it's a terrible time for awe. Climate crises, digital screens that by their very nature you can't see vast things on a tiny phone. The breakdown of social community and collective stuff that's so important to awe. At the same time, it's a great time for awe, right? A young person can listen to this talk anywhere in the world, almost any in the world, where in the world, and hear Mark read this quote from Emerson and be like, "Wow, who was that guy?" Right? So we have access to a lot of awe sources, but I think we've lost a lot of the tried and true deliverers of awe, being together, religion, collective stuff, listening to music together. And so it's a complex time for awe and a good reason to promote it. So.
And the same thing with spirituality, I
Yeah.
think. And the
Yeah.
pandemic shut us down and took so much away from us, but it also elicited this proportional longing
Yeah.
for meaning and purpose
Yeah.
and shifting values. So it's paradoxical like everything else.
It is. Well put.
Yeah. Is there science around how technology is affecting all levels?
There, that is on the horizon, and I think, in part because we know technology, like immersion in digital technologies and platforms in the social media, like Twitter or Instagram, tend to make people a little stressed, feel a little disconnected, a little envious in the case of Instagram. And those are antagonists of awe, right? So, once people start measuring awe, they'll probably find, broadly speaking, our engagement with technology, 6 to 9 hours on screens, hurts awe. At the same time, people hear kinds of music through Spotify that brings them awe that they never could hear before, from Africa or what have you. They see things visually through YouTube that can be awe-inspiring. So again, it's this. It always, with the question of technology, it always returns to, like, what do we direct our attention to, which is important to remember. And then, I think in praise of technology, there are many ways in which it's a great time for awe. The ways that we can see films with IMAX and, immersion through virtual reality suggest good things are on the horizon.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to what you were saying about imagination and
Yeah.
awe. So how does awe deepen and widen and enrich imagination?
God, you're it's funny because your questions are technology and imagination are exactly what I now know we have to study scientifically. The imagination is when we go beyond the senses and what we perceive directly in reality. And we need to have contact with what's in our senses and what we directly perceive in the world, which we take to be somewhat objective. That's how we survive in some sense. But then we have a lot of pathways to the imagination where we think about who I could be in utopian fiction. Like, what could the world be like? In spiritual experience, what might the divine forces of supernatural life be like? And awe is a pathway to those acts of the imagination, right? We feel awe as one example. One of my favorite categories of awe is moral beauty. It's just like when we're blown away by people's courage and kindness. And you hear about Malala fighting patriarchal individuals who tried to kill her because she was fighting for the right to education in Afghanistan, or I think it was. And you hear about her courage and you're like, God, that makes me imagine what I could be, right? How I could be more courageous. And so experiences of awe prompt us to start to imagine what's beyond our current knowledge. When my brother passed away, and I write about it a lot in the book, I approached death like a scientist would, like, well, give me proof. I don't know what's beyond. And I had these experiences, Mark, like I felt a couple of times his hand on my back. He had these big hands and I really felt it on my back. And I'd sit there and I'd be like, God, I still feel it there. That challenged my ordinary understanding of the world to imagine what would account for that. Maybe my body stores memories of his touch. That's interesting. Maybe in a quantum physics world, he can still touch me, So awe spurs us to imagine what we don't understand. And it's one of the great sources of the imagination.
Yeah, beautiful. And I was just going to ask you about that. You talk about the 8 wonders of life, these gateways to awe. And you start with moral beauty. You start with witnessing strength, beauty, kindness, and others, which I know is associated with elevation, that emotion of elevation.
Yeah.
Is there an inverse to this? Are we, when we are awed by the misbehavior of public figures, for example, is there how does that work?
Ah,
I know because I feel awed sometimes looking at the horrors that are going on
yeah, yeah,
in our government or in the, among the,
yeah,
among our leaders. Is that awe as well?
yeah. I think that we haven't really worked it out, and it's really regrettable. But there's a philosophical tradition right now called moral exemplarism of Zagzebski and others. It's kind of a new idea in morality that we learn how to become moral by our encounters with actions on this interesting continuum. And on one end of this dimension is moral beauty. It's like, man, that person just they gave away their kidney and they gave away their wealth in acts of sacrifice that inspire me. On the other end of the continuum are spectacular acts of moral ugliness. And it is true, like we have moral disgust, John Haidt's work, contempt, when we hear about really wealthy people hoarding stuff and not sharing. We hear about the genocides of history. We're like, oh, it's so ugly and terrible. When you think about current politicians, and no need to name the individual we probably are thinking of, how ugly their behavior is. And that's important to our sense of morality as well. And then I would put the real genocides, and we've done important work on this, not important work, my student Alan Cowan has. Awe, I believe, most of the time it feels good, and it's about life affirming and generating vast processes, right? Natural systems, moral beauty, beautiful passages of music. Horror is vast, but it's about destruction. It's about death, right? Wow, the Holocaust and those piles of bodies make me shudder. And there's good work suggesting when you're awed by horrors, it really is horror as a different state. And then I would think about moral ugliness as this other realm of fully understanding how other people's behavior moves us emotionally to understand our own sense of right and wrong.
And our own aspiration, right? It gives us a sense of what's possible for us. I was fascinated by this, that of all of these gateways, these wonders of life, moral beauty was by far the one that people were most transported by and most shaken up by.
Yeah, I would, that's why we do science, Mark. I was like, well, awe is nature. A lot of Western Europeans believe that. Then it's spirituality, maybe some music thrown in there. So we go gather these stories of awe from 26 countries, and moral beauty was the most common theme, and in some sense it seemed the most universal, of just like someone sacrificing, a courageous person overcoming disease or poverty, someone showing justice and really fighting for it. And interestingly, and this returns time and time again in our research, is everyday people, just like I'm walking through Berkeley and, I see someone give away all their money to an unhoused individual, just spontaneously. I'm like, wow, look what people do, right? Look how much they're willing to help others and sacrifice. And it's a reminder of how we can inspire each other that we need today.
And it's also a reminder that awe doesn't have to be majestic, or epic, or sublime, in any of those sorts of aesthetic senses. It can be so small that you almost don't notice it. That can be when you see the way an ant carries a little thing that's 10 times its body weight. That fills me with awe for the resilience of nature.
Yeah. One of the other misconceptions that I had starting the science is like, well, awe is really about the Grand Canyon and, being around the giant Buddha statue and what have you. And it's just all around us. We just published this paper where we got healthcare providers during the pandemic to take a minute. This is Maria Monroy, just to think about what's awe-inspiring for them right here, right? Almost like in a Zen practice, like what astounds you right now? And, just hearing a couple of your observations, Mark, I've had 2 rushes of goosebumps and awe, like the Emerson quote, you're thinking about moral beauty. I'm like, wow. So it's around us. It doesn't have to be epic or grand. It doesn't have to cost money. And, Einstein and a lot of others have felt like awe is a basic state of consciousness. We just have to push stuff to the side and just take in what's wonderful. And I have been convinced that that's possible and true.
Beautiful. And it goes along with so much mystic understanding. And of course, Einstein was not even a closet mystic. I don't even know what you would call him. Probably a flaming mystic.
I want to be a flaming mystic.
I think you may already be. So I'm curious to ask you about the second wonder of life, collective effervescence, which seems to also cut the other way than when I was talking about you know who and the horrible. Because, of course, collective effervescence, this group hysteria, this group excitement and cultishness can go in both directions, right? It can be at a fantastic, soccer game, or it can be at a rock concert, or it can be at a rally.
Yeah. Like all of these things, and like any human characteristic, it can be used for good and bad. There's a genetic condition for compassion. And if you have it, you are too compassionate and you give away everything and you don't have any boundaries, right? And it's dangerous. And the same is true for all the wonders of life. Visual art can be amazing. It also is used in the American sublime tradition to justify the taking of lands from Native Americans, right? So we got to watch it. And collective effervescence is right in the heart of this complexity. It's Durkheim has this amazing characterization of collective effervescence where you start to move in unison, right? Which we do instinctively. You start to share in your awareness of what you're looking at, a football player, somebody playing music, a politician speaking. You have this exultant feeling, and then you feel like you're a tribe or you're a we, and it's powerful, and brings us awe for better and for worse. When you read the accounts of the Rwandan genocide, those Hutus were dancing and chanting and moving together when they killed people. One of my favorite facts or sort of discoveries coming out of the collective effervescence work is it allows us to realize that the sublime in this stuff that scientists don't give enough credit to. Dance is incredible. And it brings so much emotion and awe. And there's now a new science of dance that's talking about its benefits. And even better is sports. And I'm so glad you mentioned sports where, scientists are like, I don't want to talk about sports. They're not serious. This guy, how could awe is about music and beauty? But people feel awe at sports all the time.
Have you ever gone to a soccer game in Europe? Trust me.
Yeah. What do you experience?
Well, the incredible explosion of excitement for people. We were in Spain when Spain won the World Cup, and the whole town went up in flames, figuratively speaking. People were crazy out of their minds, and there was this wonderful feeling of coming together.
Yeah. And,
I had never felt anything like that.
Yeah. And in doing this research, people start telling stories of when the Red Sox beat the Yankees at last, and the Golden State Warriors here in the Bay Area, just like the most significant moments of life. And so, collective effervescence. And again, it's this question that you raised earlier, like, what does technology do to us? And one thing it's done is it has broken down the opportunity for collective effervescence. We don't listen to music together. We listen to it separately. We don't share movies together. We stream with one or two people. We watch sports on our own. And so it's a real loss that I think technology needs to consider. So thanks for asking about it. It's one of my favorite sources of awe.
Yeah. So I'd like to ask you about another one that seems so obvious, but I'd like to hear how you would explain this. Why is nature associated with awe? If you put the Grand Canyon aside and the Booties super void and all of it, what is it about nature that is awe-inspiring?
Well, I think your teacher, Ralph Waldo Emerson, got it right, which is, I think the idea that I arrived at the end of the book about awe, in terms of, you asked earlier about its function, it helps socially, it helps us be part of groups. In terms of information and knowledge and cognition, it helps us connect our self to systems around us, right? So Yumi Kendall, who's this cellist who I interviewed, said when she plays music and she hears her notes, she realizes she's part of the history of music, humans making music, a big system. And with nature, what surfaces, and we have different studies of this, is that when you have a moment of natural awe, like I'm looking at some fall leaves and flowers on a trumpet vine plant and the oak tree in the sky, my mind, and Emerson wrote about this brilliantly in his essay on nature, it's like my mind is integrating me into the environment. I understand the systems there, the life sources of water and light, and I realize where I am part of this ecosystem, and that brings us awe. And that is one way to think about the elicitors of awe, is when the self in its boundedness connects to large things, right? Oh, I have my own sense of my soul, and now I'm having a spiritual experience where I'm aware of the whole soul of the universe. I feel awe. And that's what nature does to us. And one of the best writers on this is Dr. Uriah Selidwin, coming out of indigenous traditions, which is their awe in nature is simply when we realize, like, I'm part of this ecosystem, and like backpackers feel this, gardeners feel this, rock climbers feel this, like I'm one with this. And that's, I think, the point of natural awe.
And life and death, mortality is another major one, and that goes to the heart of this book of yours, which has a lot to do with your brother's death. You said after your brother died, you said, I felt small, quiet, humble, pure. The boundaries that separated me from the outside world faded. So it's sort of going back to this idea that awe can be immediate and small and very, very intimate. Can you say something about that experience of, because first it filled you with awe, and then you found that awe had left you and you needed to relearn or reconnect with awe. Could you say something about that process?
Yeah, thanks for pointing it out. That is the central arc of the book. My brother was 1 year younger than me, Rolf, and we were very close, shared everything together, from Little League to being each other's best men, to traveling, to living in a crazy family. And then he got colon cancer, and after 2 years passed away. And I was sitting there, and it had been horrifying, like colon cancer is, up until his last day. And he really started to transition to what I perceived to be some different space of existence. And I just like sensed it directly, like felt it in his being, sensed it around him. And I didn't see him die, but he got very close, because he died after we all went to sleep. He died at 3 a.m., I think. And I, in that moment of his knowing he was dying, I was humbled by the life cycle. Like, man, every life has this pattern. And he is gone. He seems to have gone somewhere that I don't understand. And it was almost like a spiritual experience. I was dissolving and I disappeared. I was just wondering about his being in all of us, feeling it very richly. The next day was just, like a lot of people report, was just filled with, the sky felt so meaningful. Birds, and a church bell, the birds flew away, and I was just like, wow, this all feels like my brother. And then, I had to relearn awe. I fell into a very hard state, anxiety, panic, depression, meaninglessness, just like he just was how I saw the world. And he was gone, and I just was, had trouble making sense of things, and awe got me back to it, just going in search of the 8 wonders.
So that's what you did. You set out in search of these different doorways.
Yeah, just listen to new music and go out into the mountains and, talk to ministers and spiritual leaders, and go talk to artists, and, visit cemeteries, and just really think about those 8 wonders and how they can get us to what is meaningful in our individual lives.
Were you present for the births of your daughters?
Oh yeah, yeah, and they were mind blowing. Yeah,
Were those awesome experiences as well?
yeah. No, when Natalie, my older daughter, was born 26 years ago, just like watching her head come out, and then like seeing her face, and I study the face so much and how it resembled all kinds of people in the family, and and just like, and then the rush of oxytocin and love, and it is just, and my younger daughter too, but Serafina, but yeah, it was transcendent.
Mm.
And it changed my life, as we're now learning. It changes your neurophysiology and how you look at the world. So unbelievable.
Would you call that a sacred experience?
I would. I think some people, Emerson would. He felt that nature was spiritual. I agree. And that is a natural process. It's one of the fundamentals of giving birth. So yeah, it was sacred to me. It was irreplaceable. I wouldn't trade it for anything. You couldn't put a price tag on it. It was its unique thing. I think some people out in the religious world would say that's not sacred, but I would.
How do you define sacred?
Yeah, I define sacred as something that brings you a source of awe that feels uh, it's beyond the material world of transaction. You wouldn't put a price on it. You wouldn't sell it. And it brings you a sense of unity with the forces that you believe bring life to the world.
Beautiful. That's beautifully said. You say in the book, awe occurs in a realm separate from the mundane world of
Yeah.
materialism, money acquisition, and status signaling, a realm beyond the profane that many call the sacred. And then you talk about mystic encounters being another one of the major doorways to awe. Have you had mystic encounters in your own life?
Well, thank you for asking. You're the first person who's asked me that question. Um, it's so interesting because when you study awe, you get to people like Emerson and William James and Walt Whitman and Arjun and the Bhagavad Gita and the Buddha and Paul on the road there's all this spiritual writing of awe. Julian of Norwich, encountering Jesus and just full of awe and love. And it's one of the eight wonders. And I watching my brother die, I've had some supernatural experiences but in grief, I had several. I heard my voices. I saw my brother a few times after he died. I heard his voice on a regular basis. This was layered into dreams that were unbelievable. And then I felt his hand on my shoulder several times. And I think if you had physiological instruments, you would have detected impressions on my skin and his voice in my brain. And so that transcends the laws of neuroscience and physics in some ways, and to me felt almost spiritual. And most people say, yeah, that's a spiritual experience. You can't explain it with the laws of physics, neuroscience, or psychology, or chemistry. And the bigger question for me that I grapple with is, do I feel, would I call that spirit or divine? I don't know, maybe.
Right. Did you hear any mystical experiences doing the book from people that were transformative that stuck with you? Did you do interviews on that?
Oh yeah, one of them was Reverend Jennifer Bailey, who African American minister in Nashville. When I got the data that spirituality is a source of awe, I just started interviewing a lot of ministers and religious people. Went to India, and Malcolm Clements Young here in the US, who had a very Emersonian type of mystical experience looking at a lake when he was 10 years old. And I've had that kind of experience of supernatural beauty. But Reverend Jennifer Bailey was, when I asked her about the divine, she said, it's her grandmothers, that they had such courage and strength facing racism and Jim Crow and slavery, that when she thinks about them, because they had the spirit in them, that they laughed and sang and prayed and cooked food and found community. And when I heard that, it's a story of moral beauty. I was like, yeah, that's what I feel. When I used to play pickup basketball, I'd go there for exercise and I love basketball, but I also go there for spirit. Like it was this mixing of people and laughter and play and emotion and unity that felt almost spiritual for me. And I would, if I were Emerson, I would say it is spiritual. There's some spirit in that game that is transcendent. But I would get critiques from my more cautious scholars of spirituality. So such is life.
I hear you hedging the word spiritual. As a scientist, you may have to do that.
No, it's more when you talk to religious scholars, they're like, that's not sacred. You have to commit to a sense of the divine. And I'm like,
Oh gosh. Oh, really? So it's interesting. So there's more pushback from the religious people than you get from the academics.
Yeah. I remember I was, for the book, and forgive this story, I was going to give a talk in Vermont, and I was reading about near-death experiences because my brother was about to die. And and when you have a near-death experience, it feels like awe. You're just like this light and these people and you're merging. And this guy picks me up and I'm talking to him and he's like, well, this is my night job. I'm a minister in the daytime. And I was like, oh, great. Tell me about it. We started talking about spirituality. And I said, it's so amazing. There's this new science of near-death experiences and it really feels spiritual to people and like awe. And he said, that's the most dangerous finding I've ever heard of.
Wow.
Because, we can't claim what that is. It has to be ordained for us by higher forces. So yeah, I get pushback, but.
Right. Do you think the explosion of interest in psychedelics is connected to a longing for awe in our culture?
Oh man, in some sense, earlier in our conversation, we were like, what about technology? What about these times? It's such a hard time for awe. The young people are moving away from the churches in historic figures. I mean, it's like, it's unbelievable how this could change so fast. And so they've been left this opening, and you rightfully used the word meaning earlier. We hunger for transcendent ideas about who we are. Awe gives that to us. So do psychedelics. And yeah, there are labs now, David Yaden, Peter Hendricks, my lab, who say the magic ingredient of psychedelics, spirit medicines, and indigenous perspectives is self-transcendent emotion of bliss and love of humanity and awe. And I think the data will bear that out. And it speaks to like, we need to return to awe in its power and get religion's wisdom out more without the attached dogma to it.
Right. And without mistaking the messenger for the message and getting Ram Dass used to talk about that all the time, that when he was using LSD and he realized that he needed to stop so that he could learn how to access that experience or a semblance of that experience without it. Yeah. And I wonder about a lot of people who are tripping their brains out these days.
Yeah.
And if there comes a point where it becomes counterproductive.
I was an enthusiast of psychedelics when Michael Pollan, a good friend, his book came out, brilliant book. I think it's going to do a lot of good, but one of the perils is we lose sight of how we can access transcendent things all the time. Just listen to a piece of music intentionally or watch the sunset, look at fall leaves, etc. So I do worry about that. And a lot of deeply contemplative people, in the indigenous traditions, Dr. Uriya Salidwin, Buddhist traditions, etc., are worried, like, you can't just use that as your pathway to spirit. There are many ways to get there.
Right. Can you give an example of a big idea that prompts awe? Because epiphanies is another one of these 8 wonders of life. Well, can you tell us, how that might work?
Well, what's one for you? What's a big idea that you love?
A big idea that I love. I'd say quantum theory. Just the fact that things are not as they appear. And the idea that there are different dimensions that we're not aware of and that they've actually been identified.
17
I,
of them, or,
the fact that it's a cell or no, an atom can appear in two places at the same time. I mean, what's that about?
Exactly. Well, you just proved it. So,
Did I just answer my own question?
no, but there's so it's striking, we walk around with this sort of default understanding of the world, and then we get hit with something that doesn't make sense. And it can be nature or moral beauty or a piece of music or an idea. And then you're like, wow, how do I make sense of this idea? And ideas are vast and mysterious, and they trigger awe. When we gathered stories of awe, people were writing about like big data is just like, wow, AI. I just was giving a talk, and this guy raised his hand. He's like, dark matter. We're all dark matter. We were nothing. And I was like, wow. But if I tweak you pinch you, you will definitely feel physical matter. Yeah, and I love that. I love the fact that the human mind is so creative that we can be awestruck by the ideas of our own mind. My favorite, to your example question, I was reading E.O. Wilson's, towards the end of his life, he started writing these almost mystical books. He's an evolutionary psychologist and, into his 90s, studied ants, and then starts wondering about the meaning of it all. And he's like, God, it's so remarkable. I can't remember which book he wrote about this, that it took billions of adaptations in evolutionary history that we now can pinpoint with science for you and I, Mark, to have this conversation, And when I started thinking about that as a truth about our lives, it brings me awe all the time, So yeah, thank goodness, and thank goodness for philosophers and poets and writers, is they give it to us in their unique, powerful ways.
Right. You talk about flavoring themes.
Yeah.
What is a flavoring theme, and how does that affect the awe
Yeah, I know.
experience?
That was John Haidt's phrase, and when we wrote this paper on awe in 2003, the core of awe is, man, it's vast and it's mysterious. And once I really process something through that lens, I'll feel awe. Then you add themes that give a shading to that experience. So one is supernatural. If you are raised in a really supernatural tradition, like the Japanese were in the yokai era of like drawing things that represented forces and things you didn't understand. If you have a lot of supernatural ideation, your awe experiences will have a lot of supernatural content. That was God that caused the tree to fall, and that was God that produced the lightning and the disease in that child and the mental disturbance in that person. And that's true of a lot of people's. Threat is a major flavoring theme. So a lot of East Asian cultures, we're finding, their moral beauty is more hierarchical, right? It's like, oh, that violinist is so talented and inspiring, but has so many greater abilities than me. That powerful figure at work is so amazing. I feel threatened by their superiority, and their awe has more fear in it, more threat, more activated physiology. And so, you got to look to account for the varieties of awe, and there are many. You got to build in these flavoring themes like supernatural content, threat, beauty, and others to make sense of it.
That's so fascinating. So how would beauty be a flavoring theme?
Yeah. So you might have, an experience. Let's say you are amidst the redwoods, or you're standing surrounded by 360-foot tall trees, and their trunks are massive, and you have this awe experience, like it's vast, it's mysterious, can't imagine how things are so big. And then in the trunk, in the trees, you see this light falling on the red bark, and it kind of has this beautiful pattern. And that becomes part of the multidimensional nature of the experience of like, I'm awestruck, there's this little flavoring of beauty that's part of it. And that happens often in awe experiences. So the what we have to grapple with when we tackle these emotions, words make us think of stereotypical occurrences, that it's just singular, but actually there are all kinds of shades and gradations and variations that we have to make sense of, and beauty helps us with that.
And just to come back to horror for a minute,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of a friend of mine went to a place in India called the Rat Temple. And you go inside this dark place and it's swarming with thousands and thousands and thousands of rats. And people go there to worship the rats. And he had a moment of realizing that this was the part of his psyche, or the part of the human psyche, that had created Auschwitz.
Yeah.
He had this
Yeah.
big opening,
Yeah.
a big idea opening.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that horror became the shading
Yeah.
for the awe experience, and it had a very positive outcome for him. It was
Yeah.
very humbling. He realized, oh, this is me too.
Yeah.
This is an aspect of who I am. So I just think that horror has a transformational
I
component
agree.
to it.
I agree. And the horror would be the starting point. This is true. I work with veterans, and we did this rafting study I talk about that reduces PTSD in veterans through awe. And they often, it's very similar, which is they would see the horrors of the battle, right? Carnage and dead bodies. And I mean, it's really horrifying, like we're seeing in the Middle East now, in Gaza and and Israel. And the horror that they felt, that's the starting point. Then their mind is wondering, like, what caused this? What do humans do? What's the political system that gave rise to this? And then you arrive at, like, God, it's these big forces that are awe-inspiring in certain vantage points that can bring about genocide, that can create the need to revere a room full of rats, right? It's like, wow, we can overcome this with ideas that are transcendent, and then you get awe. And that's part of, it's why it's such an active part of so much of human history. Is it just gets us wondering.
It gets us wondering.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So just one last question. It's a big question, but
Yeah.
I want to talk to you a little bit about ego death and the connection between ego death and awe. And you talked about the awe experience relaxing the default network. Could you just say something about awakening to things that are larger than the self and that dimension of the awe experience?
Well, it really, it's one of the fundamental processes of awe is the self becomes small, your self-interest becomes less insistent. You think less about yourself, and it opens you up to things. And what I think it opens us up to is a fundamental truth about reality, which is reality is all these systems that we can be part of: ecosystems, social systems, artistic systems. And I really felt it. That's what happened to me in grieving my brother. I was awestruck by his loss and what life is, and then I just deconstructed, lost my sense of self, and I had to reconstruct it through awe, right? And I had to intentionally go listen to music really carefully and dance with people in different kinds of music, and talk to naturalists and study natural systems, trees and the like, and go to spiritual types and being museums and look at paintings that I'd seen with my brother. I had to reconnect to these systems of life. And that's what awe does, is it says, you have a bundle of self-interest that you have to be careful about to survive. But there's all this broader stuff, bigger stuff around us that you also have to be part of to live. I have to be part of a group. I have to be part of culture. I have to speak a language. I have to have a work discipline. And that is what awe helps us find, locate, and embrace. And that's what happened to me personally in grief, through awe, and after horror, like you nicely said in our last point. And that's what awe does. And I think the promise it holds for us.
And did you feel like a different person after the experience of losing your brother? Did that awe experience, that dissolution of self, inform who you became after he was gone?
Definitely. I mean, I uh, it's almost like it has parallels, but I think it's stronger than the psychedelic effects. Like I became more humble, you know, like science doesn't have all the answers or half the answers. And I became more open. And that's one of the hallmarks of awe and psychedelics is like, wow, I look at what I didn't understand, you know, and now I'm open to a lot of things, not just the spiritual ramblings of some guy in Sproul Plaza on the Berkeley campus who's ranting and raving about God, but really just open to everything. And I think, it's back to Emerson that, his life was full of openness. Darwin, lots of openness, always like, I don't know what, I got to learn more. And that's what awe did for me in that experience.
Great. Thank you so much. What a great conversation. I so appreciate it. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you, Mark. Thank you for your work. I really, really appreciate it. Thanks for this conversation.
Thank you, Doctor. Take good care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.